You gotta understand, I'm a goblin. I sit in my little cave on my little computer all the little long day. To be clear, I don't sit on the computer. I use the computer while sitting on a chair. Now, look, I'm not an idiot, I hope. I recognize a sedentary life is not exactly a healthy life, but it's difficult not to be a nerd when your principal interests are playing video games and wasting your life on social media. To prompt a change in myself, I decided to adopt a more analog hobby that would get me away from my screens. I bought myself a yo-yo a couple months back, spelt Y-O-U-G-H, and I've been practicing with it a lot in my downtime. Not to brag, but I've learned some pretty slick tricks. I can make the thing go down and back up, I can spin it around, kind of pull it back up, and I can put it on the ground and have it go brrr across the carpet before coming back up. I'm pretty sure nobody's ever achieved such feats before. Like 90% sure. Good morning after evening, Cosmoronic number 7. I'm Fring and I hope you're doing well. This amusingly, considering last week's episode, I've noticed that the discourse surrounding Elden Ring has become even more toxic than normal. The big development that I noticed was that apparently there are developers for certain studios that have been criticizing Elden Ring in a somewhat smarmy way. Not a great look. I think one of the developers who was criticizing it was they worked at Guerrilla on Horizon Forbidden West. I wonder if there was an element of damn, the game that I worked on really got overshadowed by Elden Ring. Yeah, I will get around to playing that game eventually. Eventually, I will play it. I've been too busy though. Partly working on projects, but also partly watching specifically Masterchef Canada. That show was very wholesome and entertaining to watch, which I guess is interesting considering I don't watch a lot of reality TV. I don't watch a lot of, like, network television at all. The only reality TV shows that I like are the ones that feature Gordon Ramsay. So, Hell's Kitchen is, like, my favorite reality TV show. But, otherwise, there's not a whole lot that captures my interest in terms of reality TV. For reasons which I hope are pretty obvious, there is so little for me to pull out of a lot of reality TV shows that I can barely engage with them. Now, it used to be when I was a kid, I watched a lot of network television. I watched a lot more network television when I was a kid. And something you notice in Australia, and so I watched MasterChef Australia among other shows that were on at the time. And something that I noticed anyway, when watching TV back then, was that there were certain trends that, that the reality TV show spread across all of the networks. There were these very clear trends in terms of what the interest was. Throughout the 2000s, I remember that, Big Brother, that was on. But then it was like around 2010 that MasterChef Australia showed up, and it was quite popular. And so the shows that we got for a long time in reality TV, and something you need to understand about reality TV in Australia. In America, I think you get like one episode a week. Here, it's often you'll get 3 or 4 episodes a week, and the episodes are 2 hours long. Like, reality TV dominates what's on television here. And so, across all the networks, the big focus of reality TV for a few years was just cooking shows. It was just cooking shows. And then, it started to change into home renovation shows. That was the big thing for a while. And then, and we are still in that phase now, it is dating and, like, romance shows, the big popular thing right now. There is, so, a lot of the reality TV shows that are in Australia are, like, based on TV shows that originated elsewhere, right? Like, MasterChef, I believe, started in the United Kingdom. The Bachelor, obviously, that's an American show. Big Brother was also not from here. Oh yeah, singing shows. That was the 2000s. Damn, it's just Australian Idol and X Factor. Yeah, that was on for a while. But in terms of the dating shows now, the big popular one, the very popular one, is a show called Married at First Sight. It is awful, but it is incredibly popular, and I can only hope that the reason why that show is so popular is because people watch it ironically. I mentioned that Hell's Kitchen's my favorite reality show. I think the reason why I like it is because Gordon Ramsay has a very magnetic personality that I enjoy watching. He is like one of my favorite television personalities. The speed with which he can throw out insults. He is just a very interesting person to watch. And I think part of the something that works in his favor is that he actually, like, he is an incredibly talented chef. I think it's something that we often forget when just watching him talk about, while he's on these shows, either judging or, like, hosting or talking to restaurant owners, that this is an incredibly skilled chef. And that sometimes comes through when you watch the shows, and it's really fun. And I guess something that's interesting as well with his shows is that they are certainly not all the same. There is a pretty clear difference between the American shows and the British shows, and I personally, like, Kitchen Nightmares, not as big of a fan of the American version. It's way too dramatized, way too much of a desire to have, like, sob stories and to basically weave a narrative that is more suited for television, whereas the British Kitchen Nightmares, way more engaging as far as I'm concerned. I really like the British version of Kitchen Nightmares. It's very diegetic. We don't have crazy bombastic music or stupid sound effects. We are focused on the situation, and every restaurant is different. Like, in the American version, the food always sucks. The restaurant's always in, like, poor shape in terms of cleanliness. There are issues with, like, cooks or owners or, like, there always seems to be, like, very similar problems that are drastic. Whereas sometimes in Kitchen Nightmares in the UK, the food is actually good, or there are aspects of it that are really strong, but there's something that they're just missing. It's different. It feels more real to me. And yeah, I still really like Hell's Kitchen. Hell's Kitchen is very, very entertaining, and I guess part of the thing that I find interesting about it is that we are watching chefs working on the line in a restaurant. I think that of reality TV shows, the ones that I find more interesting involve some kind of skill. It's why I would prefer it here if they went back to just the renovation shows more so than just these romance shows. Because, like, at the very least, the people are doing... Like, I don't know anything about renovations. Then again, I don't know a whole lot about cooking. But, like, at least it's a competition where the winner is going to be determined based on skill, rather than just, I guess, a gaggle of people who are there purely for the sake of manufactured drama for the entertainment of other people. But how is it that, Hell's Kitchen is, like, my favorite reality TV show, and then I spend the last 3 weeks watching several clips of Masterchef Canada, a much, much friendlier and more wholesome reality cooking show. I think what happened was I stumbled down the rabbit hole. I haven't watched a lot of the American MasterChef, and I watched some of the clips, and there are aspects of it that are entertaining, but I don't know, there's just something about it, it just doesn't resonate with me. And I guess part of it as well is that it seems like there's a lot less discussion in a lot of the clips on specific aspects of the cooking. It seems more oriented towards drama than it does to cooking, though I guess cooking is a big part of it too. But the Canadian version seems like very focused on cooking. The chefs, the judges on the show are, like, very friendly. They each have their own distinct personalities, but they're all friendly and provide feedback and are supportive of the contestants. And it is cool to watch, like, when a plate is presented, that they're going to be going into detail about the aspects of it that they think are working from a technical side. And even when the contestants make mistakes, they still try to highlight the positives. It's a much more supportive and constructive show, which, yeah, that's like oddly appealing to me. I find it really entertaining to watch. But that's part of the reason why I haven't played Elden Ring. I will get around to it eventually. I think I'm partly intimidated by how huge that game is. You look at people, I've been playing that game for what, like 70, 80 hours? It's been out for like a week. And yet, like, nobody seems to be finished with it yet. I think that's a little bit intimidating. There's projects to be worked on, things to do, and committing to, like, 70 to 100 hour long game. Because that game, all I ever hear is it's just massive beyond what you would typically expect from other FromSoft games, and those games themselves are already quite big. I remember I beat Dark Souls 3 very quickly apparently, but I beat it in about 15 hours? I believe, 15 to 20 hours. Which is very fast, from what I understand, but it seems like Elden Ring, that's just not going to be possible. I remember there was a while ago when a lot of the conversation surrounding video games was talking about length. Like how long games ought to be, and there was a big push for games to become, there should be more acceptance of games that are shorter, like, 4 hours, or even less than that. With people justifying it's like, well, in terms of people's amount of time, there's not a lot of time that people have, and hey, maybe it's better for a game to have a really focused, shorter experience versus a longer. And I guess the implication was that it was going to be necessarily bloated or extended beyond what it ought to be. I feel like there's a place for both, really. And I guess Elden Ring may well spark that discussion again. I will get around to it eventually. So I watched The Batman twice last week. I know I've already spoken about it at length on EFAP last week, but I want to talk about it here, because now it feels like my thoughts are very well crystallized. That's a film I've had to think about for a while, which is fun. It's nice to be able to sit down and think about a film you've watched and enjoyed, but kind of realize your thoughts fully with more time. And I think at this point I have a pretty clear idea of how I feel about that film overall. And I think that there's a lot to talk about, and it's especially interesting when you look forward at what's coming from DC next, like over the next couple of years. The landscape surrounding DC is quite interesting, I guess, by comparison to Marvel, but before we talk about that, let's talk about The Batman. I watched the film twice, and both times I really enjoyed it. I really, really, really liked it. I liked that film a lot. I remember though, when I came out of the theater the first time, I wasn't quite sure what I thought overall, and I think it was because that is a film with a lot of moving parts, and I think that it can be difficult to see if it all lines up fantastically when the information is coming towards you, all at once. But then the second time around, when you know where things are going, and you know what happens, the experience is obviously different. I mean, rewatching films is generally always going to benefit you in terms of figuring out what you think about the film, because you'll just pick up on more than you did the first time around. But this film in particular, I think, benefits significantly from a rewatch, because it is principally a detective story. There is a central mystery that is being unraveled as you go, with clues telling you a little bit more, twists and turns. And the first time around, you're along for the ride trying to figure things out yourself. The second time around, you know where it's going and you can start to piece things together. And I think I really needed that rewatch, because as much as I enjoyed that film, I just got the distinct impression that in my mind that there were things that weren't quite sitting right in terms of the plot that I wanted to think about more. And now that I've rewatched it, I pretty much know, what I think. The TLDR is, I really like The Batman. I respect it a lot as a film. I think that there are a lot of aspects of it that are strong, but I do think the plot is a mixed bag. But I would certainly recommend it, especially if somebody likes Batman, or likes detective stories, or noir. I think that there's a lot to latch onto, and I think it's quite an experience to watch it in theaters. I feel like the aspect of that film that basically everybody agrees is excellent is the production standpoint. That film is downright inspired in terms of its cinematography. There are so many clever and interesting and creative shots. It's not merely good, it is going above and beyond in a lot of the things it achieves. We have a lot of great POV shots, there's a lot of clarity and a lot of imagery. It feels like a film that was storyboarded. It feels that way because there are so many strong shots throughout that film. Great use of light and shadows. Yeah, the lighting is really strong. It's not often that you talk about that. Yeah, the lighting specifically in a film was strong, but it really was, which is great considering the subject matter of the film. The soundtrack is phenomenal. I will say it is kind of funny to me that people are realizing now that I believe it's Michael Giacchino. That's how you pronounce his name. That he's a great composer. It doesn't surprise me at all that the man who composed the theme for The Incredibles created a fantastic soundtrack here. But it really is great. The motif with the Batman theme, like finding a way to integrate that in several points of the film. Catwoman has a really cool theme. It's really strong and bold. And I mean, I know that it's kind of becoming a meme, right? But I feel like the fact that it has that meme power already, the just like bwam, 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 like that's indicative of how strong it is. It wouldn't surprise me if that just becomes iconic. It's hard to forget that theme, you know? Like, it's hard to not remember that. It's so bold. In terms of, like, set design and overall presentation of the world, it's incredibly strong. Gotham, in this film, is a very distinctive place. It has a strong identity that I don't feel, personally, comes through in the Nolan films. In the Dark Knight trilogy, Gotham is just a city. It is a place, like a vague, nebulous American, basically New York. Whereas it feels like, and I mean, of course, like the older films from the 80s and 90s, they definitely go for a very unique vibe, and a not particularly realistic one with those cities. But in this film, it definitely feels like this it integrates the Gothic architecture. It integrates certain it definitely pulls from, you can see, like, New York and Chicago, but it pulls in things that are very uniquely, that just make you think of, Gotham, because of the Gothic architecture. Who'd have thought? It really felt like a unique place that wasn't quite like anywhere in our world, but yet it felt like a place that could exist in our world, which I think is quite an accomplishment. Something that I think everybody agrees upon, or agrees on, is that the acting was great across the board. I feel like pretty clear standout was Colin Farrell as the Penguin. He completely fell into that role. You can't see him in it. He was that great. But I mean, it can't be understated, right? Robert Pattinson was really great in this role. It is an interesting characterization of Batman, to be sure. I'm not settled on it yet, but he might be my favorite live-action rendition of the character, and that is obviously in part aided by his performance. This rendition of Batman is interesting to me in that it is a mix of faithful and original. There are obviously elements that are pulled from the comics, and we have much more of a focus on the detective side of Batman in this film than we've had in any other film. But yeah, that is a big element of the character throughout his appearances in comics and video games and TV shows, is the detective side. Figuring things out, going through crime scenes, piecing things together. That is personally, that's something that appeals to me a lot, that I've really wanted to see for a long time, and I'm glad we saw here. And yet, you know, on the other side, we spend very little time with Bruce Wayne, and we don't have him playing up the billionaire playboy persona. He's not particularly well adjusted in that, you know, that part of his life, which is, you know, that's a bit of a shift from what we typically see for Batman. But I mean, that was very clearly deliberate when you think about what the theme of this film was, which I guess we'll get to in a moment. And, you know, another part of the story that is not quite similar to what we typically see, the relationship between Bruce and Alfred is a lot colder than normal, than what we normally see. Now, I think that's an interesting idea, to be sure, but I do wish we got more time with Andy Serkis as Alfred, because his performance was really great. What little we got, I was enthralled every time. I believe he only got 4 scenes in total. He was really not in the film much at all. And I mean, obviously, there's a thing you're going for there in terms of the story you're trying to tell, but I really feel like even if we got more scenes with him, that it would have worked, it would have helped if we got to see more examples of the wedge between them, of Bruce disregarding Alfred's directions or like suggestions. I like Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman. The character felt multi-layered and mysterious. It was hard to tell a lot of times whether she was being manipulative or earnest. But I mean, also her story is pretty straightforward, right? And it's strong, with her confrontation with like Falcone being a big emotional high point in the film and super important with regard to the theme. It was an interesting dynamic at play throughout the film. Yeah, her part was strong. Like that was there's really not much that could be talked about as being like a problem there. And I really liked Jeffrey Wright as Gordon. It was an interesting Gordon. He was much more involved in the mystery and like so frequently working with Batman and less of a role within the police than we typically see. And then I guess we get to the more the part where I'm not quite sure how I feel overall. I really liked Riddler. Up until a point, I thought the performance by Paul Dano was great throughout. But as for the character, I think I was really engaged with him up until near the end when he engaged, I guess, the end of his plan. He was, because up until that point he was cryptic. But as you're watching, it becomes clearer what his goals are, what his prerogative is, what he's trying to achieve. And of course, he is insane, but you can latch on to what his intentions are and his goals. But then his priorities seem to shift drastically right at the end. I'm not super thrilled with it, nor am I with the argument that he's simply insane. I would like to give the film more credit than that. I think that there is, I would prefer to believe that there was a clear intention with that character, that despite his manicness, he was operating with a goal in mind, and an interesting goal in terms of how it connects to the theme and how it parallels Batman's goals and arc. I appreciated it more during the first half than in the second half, though I do think that you can present a steel man in favor of the film in terms of like his motivations, right? Because that character, his perception is essentially that the system is corrupt. In terms of, by looking into the renewal fund, he begins to figure out that a lot of money's been misappropriated, a lot of corruption and wrongdoing has been swept under the rug, and he decides to take it upon himself to actively pursue the corrupt elements within the system and bring them into the light, essentially. I think that's strong as a motivation, and the fact that he is inspired by Batman, I feel like I feel like it all connects and it works. And the argument that you could make in favor of the decision he makes at the end, it would be that he believes the system fundamentally is corrupt, and that the only way to, salvage it is to destroy it completely. That would be the argument that you would present in favor of his characterization. I just don't think it's quite as strong. And in a certain sense, it comes off as a bit of a contradiction. Because otherwise, I really enjoyed that character. But I mean, the conversation about a lot of the character work needs to be framed through the lens of the theme of this film. Because the theme is strong. It is very strong and clear. I really like that the film seeks to explore the idea of how Batman ought to operate in the world. And how hope is better at affecting change than fear. You think about that amazing opening scene, that fantastic, just downright fantastic opening scene that we get where Bruce is explaining that Batman as a symbol, what makes him powerful is that he could be anywhere, in any shadow, any time that you're out doing something wrong at the night, he could be there. It's not just a signal, it's a warning. It's fantastic. Visually, in terms of theme and character, it is so strong. And then to have the parallel right at... And I think the most important part of that scene, in terms of hammering the point home, is that when he beats up the criminals, the person who he has saved is quite terrified of him, and is just asking him not to hurt him. It's like, that's interesting. To then have it be the opposite at the end when he realizes that he's essentially inspired the villains, in part because he hasn't been good at communicating to the world what his objectives are, and he hasn't been thinking about what good he could be doing with the Bruce Wayne side of his life, that then he realizes that it's not good enough to scare people. You have to inspire them and show them, like, that there's, you know, a better way, that there's a path to a better world. And of course, you know, that there needs to be a level of change within the institutions. That it's not, it can't be enough that you've just got a guy dressed up as a bat beating up criminals. There needs to be a change from within the system. I think it's a bold choice to have the villains be directly inspired by Batman. If it feels like something that's not as often explored in superhero stories, it's definitely not a thing that has never been explored ever, but it feels like it is a little bit underexplored. Like, often the element that gets explored is that the presence of a superhero will invite challenge to them. Like, that it brings the crazy people out to want to challenge him. As opposed to, I guess, what it is here, where it is like they're directly inspired to be like him. But it's just totally a warping of what his goals are. I think that's really interesting. And to focus on Batman as an agent in Gotham, and how he might be causing more harm than good, or at the very least isn't fixing anything, and is simply beating up criminals, I think that's a really cool choice and an interesting thing to explore. And I think they explored it pretty well. I guess there are ways that I think it could be hammered home a bit stronger because the film is very plot heavy, and as a consequence, it feels like there's a bit less time to focus on... There's a bit less time to focus on character stuff that I think could have pushed it even further. But, you know, like, there is a clear intentionality behind the theme and the decisions that were made in terms of the characters and what is presented in that story. I think the clearest example of this would be that the Bruce Wayne side is neglected. It is completely neglected. And it's highlighted a couple of points that he has the capacity through that side of his life to affect change for the better. But he is obsessed with Batman. That is... Bruce's obsession in this film is with being Batman. It's like consumed him. It has absorbed him. He is Batman at all times. We have a couple of references to that as well. And I get the impression that in the next film, there is going to be much more of a focus on Batman as a symbol for hope, and that there will probably be much more focus on Bruce Wayne doing things beyond just being Batman and seeing if he can achieve anything there. And that might give us more opportunities to see more of Andy Serkis' Alfred, which I am very keen for, personally. I suppose that brings us to the plot, the aspect of the film that I believe to be the weakest. I can appreciate the attempt to present a complex mystery for Batman to unravel, but the plot is wonky. It is. It's just wonky. It's held together by a string of extreme conveniences, though I would say that it is something of an accomplishment that there are not many outright plot holes, given how many moving parts there are. But there are a lot of conveniences, lots of plot armor. But it is a strong effort, and I guess... I feel like it's just worth commending that they tried to tell something that is, like, more complex than is typically seen in superhero films. That, like, that is deserving of some level of praise in and of itself, even if it wasn't executed fantastically. And I guess as well, it feels like a lot of the issues that have been highlighted could be fixed with very minor tweaks. Like, let's give a stronger reason for Selina to enter the room with Batman so that we can get a stronger connection there that can lead him to the Annika part that helps him out tremendously, rather than her seemingly just walking in. And if she had walked in 5 minutes earlier or later, he would have lost a significant advantage in terms of all of the leads that stem from her. Or, you know, like, in terms of the plot armor, like, do we need to have... do we need to have Batman when he flies out? Like, if we want to show him being not super competent, I'm totally happy with that. That's great. I like to see it. But to have him deploy his wingsuit and then parachute and smash his head off of, like, a steel bar, you know? Like, do we need to do that? Can we just, like, make a minor tweak to fix that up? Can we find ways to make the off-duty cop, who is, like, a big thing that connects several pieces together, just appear a little bit less obvious things in terms of bringing him into the plot? We need to think about the thing with the phone, because the phone is hugely important and it's confusing how all of that works. You think about the aspects of the plot that are strong. The parts that I think about the most are the Riddler clues. Like, the Riddler stuff, it feels really strong. All of the riddles are thematically appropriate. There's a lot of foreshadowing in them. They're clever. I would just say they're downright clever, a lot of those Riddler clues. They were really great. I've said it a few times, but when you rewatch it and thinking about those clues, it is so indicative of an intentionality that it makes me want to commend the film more, because it was clearly thought out, and it feels like some of the issues that we have here are just... they could be fixed. And like, I have a level of confidence in Matt Reeves that he could fix it, because it's very clear watching this film that he had a vision and executed on it very well, that he knew what he wanted to do and he thought about it, and the results were like, I personally like what the film that came out on the other side, but it feels like these things could be fixed with minor tweaks. Which is indicative of something positive, right? As opposed to a film where it's like, well, we would need to change a whole bunch to make it work. Less convenience. And I guess more of an acknowledgement of the world of Batman's operation, because that feels like an aspect that's weak. That it feels like there should be a lot more conflict between Batman and Gotham Police Department, but a lot of these conflicts are kind of glossed over. We don't spend a lot of time with it when it feels like we should be emphasizing it even more. There needs to be more acknowledgement of the world, from the world, of the consequences of certain moments, like the big pile-up on the freeway feels like the most obvious one. Like, that should have severe consequences for the Penguin and Batman, but we just kind of never talk about it. Like, the film itself doesn't recognize that there is meant to be acknowledgement here. The Penguin's probably going to jail, and Batman in particular should be very much an enemy of the police at this point. And of course, the more obvious one being Penguin pulling out a gun to kill Falcone in front of like 100 police officers. Like, he's done. He's just done. But we're not going to, we want to keep him around. And of course, I want to keep him around, but we don't need to have that happen. The big crash on the freeway, and then the Batmobile flying through the flames, the upside down shot looks amazing. That is honestly one of the few examples in this film, a film that has a lot of amazing spectacles, where the plot was beholden to the spectacle. It is one of the few examples, which I guess makes its appearance all the more noticeable. Though I do have some misgivings with the Batman, I respect it a hell of a lot as a film. From a craft perspective, it's excellent, and man, is it so nice to watch a superhero film which is the product of a clear creative vision, rather than the whims of studio executives or a desire to chase trends. Like, this is a unique film. It is a bold film. It is trying to do something that is unique in the landscape in which it exists. In a landscape filled with, broadly, a lot of happy-go-lucky superhero MCU sludge that feels like it's just being churned out, like on an assembly line, that we know exactly what kind of stuff we need to put in this film to get the best response possible from the audience, and to get them really hyped for the next film. You compare that, a desire to just set up sequels and bait what's coming next, it's always what's next, and keep subscribed to the subscription platform. Whereas this is a film that is like, it's got a beginning, middle, and end. There's obviously going to be spin-offs and sequels, but it is a strong, cohesive, whole package that is trying to be something, trying to present to us a Batman story that we haven't quite seen before, with a tone that we haven't quite seen before. A tone that reminds me a little bit of Joker. It's interesting. It feels like both films, they feel like they don't exist in our world, that they exist in a world that's... But they exist in a world that feels grounded, like ours, but not quite. Where Gotham has a distinctive personality, and the people within it are interesting. Supposed to tie a neat little bow on this conversation, I'm eager to see more of this universe, and I know that we're gonna see more, and hopefully they don't screw it up. But I'm eager. I'm excited because I like this film for the problems that I think that it has, and I do think it has some serious problems. There are aspects of it that I believe to be pretty strong, and it appeals to me personally. Batman is one of my favorite superheroes, and we've had a lot of different interpretations of the character, a lot at this point, and this one feels unique. Even though, in many ways, I feel like it pulls quite strongly from the source material. What we have in this film is a really rich base from which to continue from. We have a really rich base. There are so many options that we can explore with Batman and Bruce in terms of the dynamic there. Now that we've established, you know, the core arc here, that he realizes that, like, fear as a tool that he was heavily focused on here, that's not quite the way that he ought to operate, so it'll be interesting to see in the next film how he starts to manifest these changes in his approach and how he struggles with it, and hopefully we'll have more dynamics between Bruce and Alfred. We have characters who are obviously going to stick around because we're going to have Jim, and I'm excited to see Jim working with Batman again because he was just entertaining to see on screen. I like Jim in this film a hell of a lot as an active participant in the investigation. We can have Catwoman come back again, though maybe she disappears for a while and comes back later and we can see how she's changed. We have set up the Joker, but personally, I'd be cool if we don't see him in the next film, much, if at all. And next time around, we focus on, again, less thoroughly featured people in Batman's Rogues Gallery. I would be really happy we got Scarecrow again. I think that could be really cool in this world. Maybe we could bring in Hush as well, since there are references to him. How do we factor in the more out there, the more out there characters in the Batman Rogues Gallery? Could we find a way to put in Mr. Freeze? Could we find a way to put in Deathstroke? I don't know about Killer Croc. Could we find a way to integrate the League of Assassins? It would be interesting to see how this universe with this creative team would interpret those characters, because I think that they've done a really good job of making the Riddler and the Penguin feel like they fit into this world. And Batman himself. It's a great costume too, which I know it's like, when you talk about the production, I adore this costume. It's my favorite live action version of the costume, and it just feels so real in this world. The through line of this discussion would be that there is a lot that can be done with what is available here. And it is exciting to think about what will be next in the Batman universe that is running adjacent to the DCEU, and thank God it is, so that it can't be tarnished by any of the shit that comes out of there. Speaking of which, The Batman is the first of 5 DC films releasing this year. We got The Batman, we're also going to get Black Adam, The Flash, Batgirl, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Peacemaker also released earlier this year, and 2023 is going to see the release of Shazam, Fury of the Gods, and Blue Beetle. And several more films and spin-off shows are planned from DC going forward. There is a lot of content coming out of DC over the next few years, substantially more than has come out in the last few years. It's actually been like a lot slower in the last few years than it was for a time when they were trying to start up this universe, and then it didn't go so very well because the DCEU has been mostly terrible. Unlike the MCU, which is now beginning to deteriorate. You know, MCU's had plenty of bad films throughout the series, but like now it's really fallen apart. It feels like we've got so few characters left that I'm interested in anymore. Several characters have been assassinated or destroyed. The new characters just aren't particularly gripping. But, you know, whereas the DCEU just had nothing to offer at all. Terrible world building, just like the MCU, but also no characters that were interesting. But now, feels like things are sort of turning around. For the first time in a while, I have some level of interest in what's coming out of DC. Now, you know, it kind of sucks to say that because I don't have like any specific affinity towards like Marvel. I like Marvel and DC stuff. Batman's one of my favorite superheroes. There are a lot of really cool DC superheroes. I've definitely come around on Superman. I have a much more favorable opinion towards that template than I used to have. Of course, there are so many great characters you can pull from like Batman adjacent characters like Nightwing, Red Hood, a whole bunch of the villains. People that he can get, Deathstroke. Wow, Deathstroke's kind of his own thing. But there are a lot of great. Green Lantern is an awesome idea for a character, and there is like a cool world within like DC that you can explore. There's like a lot of options. Like there's a lot of good stuff in DC. The problem is that it's just like it's been really bad, like in terms of the films for a while now. Whereas like at least with the MCU, we were getting some good films. Like you got Iron Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, the Avengers. There were good films coming out of the the MCU, but the DCEU just kind of started off pretty catastrophically. And I mean, it feels like a lot of that stems from there was at the beginning of the series. There was so much, like, that was just Zack Snyder's stuff. By the time Justice League came out, like, 3 out of the 5 films in that series were directed by just him. It established a tone, and that tone just sucks. Like, those movies suck. It feels like it has become a contentious debate now when we all kind of agreed for a time, but, like, those films suck. Man of Steel sucks. Batman v Superman is terrible. Justice League is bad. Both the Whedon cut and the Snyder cut. Suicide Squad was awful. Wonder Woman isn't good. I'm glad that the perception is beginning to shift on that one. I remember when I first watched it, I liked it, but that film was pretty terrible as well. It was just really catastrophic from the get-go. After that point, it seemed like, because I remember earlier on with the DCU, they had all of these plans. They were going to do like a Cyborg movie. They were going to have Flash come out really soon after Justice League. Like, I believe they had a Green Lantern film that was planned, that was going to be happening real soon. They had that plan, and there were meant to be multiple Justice League movies, I believe. And then just, like it all fell apart immediately. And it seems like over the last few years, they've been trying to figure out what the hell to do. Now, I'm always going to label it this way, because from my perspective, the first film to come out of the DCEU that has like potential or good, like really clear good qualities was the Suicide Squad. Up until that point, I pretty much think everything that came out is deeply, deeply flawed. But it seems like for a time there was this like, well, we need to latch onto the good stuff that came out of this universe. Aquaman made a whole bunch of money and people said they liked it. Now that film was really funny, but ironically, not unironically, I don't think that film is funny in the way that it tries to be. And of course, like, from a world-building perspective, it's catastrophic, and the plot is utterly absurd, but it made a lot of money, and hey, look, Wonder Woman was liked until Wonder Woman 1984 came out, and pretty much tanked that, because I'm pretty sure, like, Wonder Woman 1984 is, like, one of the few movies that is widely, broadly, just universally considered to be terrible. It occupies the same rank as like The Rise of Skywalker, where just everybody agrees that that was just a mistake. And I guess there was also perception that there were aspects of of Suicide Squad that could be pulled out and work. Like they had the Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, I believe was the full title before they retitled it because it wasn't doing well at the box office. Like you can see that there was a time then they were like, oh, there are things that we should try and like retain. But how can we do that with this universe that we've created where like half of it is just stuff that we don't want anymore? That let's be real, most people don't like or are interested in. Like the stuff that was born out of the Snyder era of the DCEU. If they did, more people would have watched Batman v Superman and Justice League, both versions. And so now, and I think what happened there is that it seems like the result of all of that is that DC has kind of abandoned continuity. Like, it has a loose continuity. All of these films, with the exception of, like, Joker and the Batman, which are their own projects, they're part of the same universe, but they barely reference each other. They're really not connected at all. And I guess the interesting and cool byproduct of that is that DC seems to be far more director-focused than the MCU. Like, each film looks and feels more distinct. There is much more variety in these films in terms of the way that they look, the tones that they're going for. Less of a desire to keep everything unified. It's probably in part just through the shit world-building and box office performance of the series. But it has yielded an interesting result by comparison to the MCU, which is very much all in line with each other. There is obviously variation, right? Like Guardians is a James Gunn film. It has a distinct style. Like the films do have distinct styles to some extent, but there is definitely like a recognized and understood MCU sludge, like just an MCU template of there's gonna be quips and jokes and stuff in there, and then we're also gonna have our drama. Like that's kind of the template that's clear. DC's got a bit more variety, and I guess it is in part like you see the more clear examples of that you have something like Joker that is its own thing, completely disconnected from everything. Marvel don't do that anymore, and I don't think they're ever gonna do that anymore. Whereas DC seems to be willing to make stuff that's standalone, like the Joker, like Batman, which it's gonna spin off into its own universe, but like. That's the thing, its own universe, not connected to everything else. There's a certain freedom in that sense, and a certain level of compartmentalization that if you look at some DC film that comes out, like if Black Adam's bad, then it's not gonna spill over into the Batman stuff, or if they make a sequel to Joker, which frankly, I don't need it, I don't need it. It can be its own thing forever. It can be safe as its own standalone film. Something that's also really cool is that DC seems to be just more willing to make R-rated content, which opens the door to more stories than Marvel is likely willing to explore. I think the conversation is gonna have to happen at Marvel eventually. I don't know that I'm personally not gonna be happy if they reboot Daredevil and it's not R-rated, and not mature, and not leaning into the darker elements that it did when it was the Netflix show. I don't see Deadpool 3 working at all as like a PG-13 film. I feel like if it was, it would just be mired with jokes, making fun of the fact that it is PG-13. And I mean, you got Blade, you got Moon Knight. I would like for those to be more mature. It seems like they're trying to push it, but it feels like you're always going to have limitations because it's not just blood and violence. It's also subject matter that just becomes off limits if you're doing strictly PG-13. There needs to be a willingness to push it, but I don't know that Marvel can do that, because Marvel has established a tone. Marvel is, I think, broadly understood to be part of Disney's content brand. Disney has a very specific brand, and it seems like the goal for Disney at this point is that Fox is going to be where they're... not Fox, 20th Century Studios is going to be where the more adult content is, and Disney is going to continue being Disney. Born from the failure of the DCEU to really explode into this big popular thing, that it has had an oddly beneficial byproduct, that the lack of interconnectedness, more of a focus on individual projects being their own things, means that there is more freedom. It is almost that them not being connected means that there is more of a chance that you just end up like it's more of a crapshoot, right? You can have movies that suck, but you can have a movie that comes out and ends up being like really cool and having a lot of interesting aspects. Or, I guess if we go simpler than that, if you don't like the Marvel formula, there's a good chance you're not going to enjoy a lot of Marvel films. If you don't enjoy Shazam, it probably means you won't enjoy the next Shazam, but it says nothing about whether you'd enjoy the Suicide Squad or The Flash. Those films may well have a totally different tone and a different style. It's interesting that it means that it's just you've got more variety, that there may well be things that appeal to you, even if like other things that are part of that universe don't appeal to you. There may be long-term benefits that stem from that. All signs point to The Flash serving as a reset for the DCEU. Like, Warner Brothers is ditching the stuff that didn't work, and keeping what they think works, and trying to integrate older material like Michael Keaton's Batman into it, and then going forward from there. So it may well be that what I'm saying doesn't end up being true in the next few years, that like, after they do their reset, there is a much more unified vision for this series. Probably a vision that I'm not going to be a big fan of, if the MCU is any indication. But it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. There is so much that they could do. There are so many characters that they haven't done any projects for that would be really interesting to see. And with DC 2 embracing streaming and television shows, it's not merely limited by what would work as a film. You can have projects that are strictly television shows. And it'd be interesting to think about what could be picked as a good project to do for TV. We've seen Peacemaker. I don't like the first 1.5 episodes. But I know that they're developing spin-offs from that. They're doing Batman TV shows. And I know that they're doing a couple of like HBO movies, like the Batgirl movie is going to be on HBO Max. I'm not sure that that makes much of a difference in terms of production values or format. It feels like, despite the fact that the DCEU is 9 years old this year, it really doesn't feel like it's existed much at all, or that we've really gotten anywhere with it. That even now, it feels like we haven't started to see what that universe would really look like, because there's just been so many failures from that series. And I suppose the fact that there are going to be like 5 movies this year, 2 or 3 more next year, plus TV shows, means that the train is starting to build a bit of momentum. And I suppose after this year, with more DC films coming out this year than Marvel, it'll be interesting to see if we can get any indication from the projects that released this year of like what the DC EU, and more broadly speaking, DC films in general, whether or not they're going to more consistently deliver than what we've been getting out of Marvel lately. To hammer the point home, the MCU has been really bad in Phase 4. Black Widow, bad. Shang-Chi, probably the strongest outside of Spider-Man, but still bad. Eternals, bad. Spider-Man, great character stuff. Kind of weak world building. But I mean, also, like, the future of that, I guess, is unclear at this point. And then you think about the TV shows. WandaVision, bad. Falcon and the Winter Soldier, bad. Loki, pretty cataclysmic. I didn't watch Hawkeye, but I've heard, and then we look towards this year, we got a lot of stuff coming out, but I mean, I don't see Multiverse of Madness being super duper strong, personally. And we're all excited about Sam Raimi back to direct. I'm sure that film is going to look great, but it's not all his film. Like, there's gotta be that film is pulling in from several, it's pulling in characters and plots and things from several different films, and probably setting up a bunch to come. And you look at the rest that's coming out, it's like Thor, somewhat optimistic, because it's Taika Waititi, we'll have to see. Black Panther 2, that film seems like mired with production issues. I would be surprised if that doesn't come out turning out like a mess, given how many production issues it's had, and how little time it has. It's still shooting. That film is still shooting into this month. It's meant to come out in November. I don't know. I need to look towards the rest of the future. It's mainly Guardians. That's like the thing I'm most optimistic about, and I guess curious to see what comes out of Spider-Man next. But it's concerning. And if the last, 8 projects are any indication, there's not much cause for optimism. I don't know that DC will ever beat out Marvel in terms of popularity at this stage. Like, Marvel is churning out content at a staggering pace. They seem to have figured out exactly how to get the things out at the moments that they need them to hit, the important summer blockbuster release dates, to make sure that there is content consistently coming out on Disney+. They seem to have figured that out. And, I mean, there's Spider-Man did incredibly well. I guess the other Marvel films that came out last year didn't perform so very well, but I'm pretty sure the TV shows were watched by a lot of people. I guess Multiverse of Madness, now that we seem to be fully out of the pandemic box office numbers era, that we're back to normal in terms of how films perform in this landscape, that Multiverse of Madness and Thor and Black Panther will be more indicative of the long-term stability of Marvel. But it feels like they get talked about a lot, that they still dominate the news cycles and the discourse surrounding films. But, with all that said, with the approach that DC is taking with their films, and the fact that I've liked the last 2 films that they made, I do wonder if it is just going forward that better content will arise from DC broadly going forward, which is an interesting change of pace. Whether or not that turns out to be the case, well, that remains to be seen, but who knows? I would like some good DC films. We've been starved of those for a while. I like a lot of the DC characters, and it would be real nice if we were getting a lot more good content out of that series. But time will tell. Well, that does it for me this week. Thank you very much for hanging out. This was Cosmoronic number 7. I am Fringy, and I will catch you all next time.